Welcome to another episode of How to Avoid a Mr. H. Just love yourself, sweetie. Yeah, that's gonna be the title. You know I always change it, but I like that title because this episode is about as I do more stories in data recovery, I see more problems with myself. And I think that's why sometimes you'll find, first of all, I work way faster than what I do publish. If I catch inspiration, I'm like, muse, 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 I got to chase you because I know what it is to not have the muse. And I could lie to myself and say I'll remember later, but then I don't. And then I get pissed. So I'm following the muse. And when she gives me a break, we publish. But one of the things too is that it's really hard to talk about your abuse, especially when it's parental. And it what happens with me is these moments of realizing how stupid it is to not love yourself, only to find myself not loving myself. It is strategically and just as a basic survival mechanism, smarter for you to love yourself. Will you love yourself every day? Maybe. Maybe you'll get to that day. Will you love everything about you? There's some things that you just gotta tolerate, right? But to actually think you are a good person, getting better when you hate yourself, and to live more consistently in self-loathing than actual self-loving is deranged. And I think because my father hated himself or lived in some level, if you're a person who's constantly anxious, constantly depressed, constantly lying, constantly scheming, you're not exactly in love with yourself. You're in love with your ego. You're in love with how people are in love with you. But to have all that darkness, that messiness that you have to feed, but you also have to hide, it's hard. It would be incredibly bold and deranged to call that love and an act of self love because you live in unrest. The unrest you give others, the unrest of knowing you gave unrest. And I thought because I was a better human being than him, I was automatically love. And, there's a saying that if you're trying to love yourself, you're already loving yourself. And I guess I thought I was so raised, and one of my friends was raised in a very devout Christian home. His father was an acclaimed pastor, and we were talking about the complexity of growing up in a background that was almost obsessed with service, obsessed with charity, obsessed with giving back to humanity. And I think when we compare each other's background, his father was very successful and he enjoyed his luxury as much as he gave it. Whereas my family, particularly my father, it was this kind of what you gave to others was a cover up for what you took from someone else. Like God can't say that I didn't heal children, even though I stole and hurt from them as well. Like there's this kind of weird dynamic that we do of I'm a mixture of both. So God can't fully reject me from heaven, and hell can't fully accept me. And it's not the it's a horrible concept, but it's also not the worst concept. Because at the end of the day, if you need help and somebody helps you, like Kim Kardashian is a perfect example of somebody that is very corrupt, somebody who is very self centered, that totally is emblematic of the failures and cruel faults of the capitalistic system. And even though she has freed prisoners for her image, she freed them. They are free and they are living their best life. They have returned to life, and she did that. And even though it wasn't that altruistic, it was for her image, as most things are, it happened and it was good. And you can't take away that she did that good, even if the intentions were poor. And my family kind of lived in that dynamic of the intentions were poor, but the actions were good, right? I made you fall in love, didn't tell you I had multiple families, and then abused you for over 30 years. But I made you feel love. Remember that those few first few weeks? Wasn't that great? He had my wedding ring, but like that was my father's mentality. And again, I have said it time and time again, you don't stay in abusive relationships if there isn't a level of good. I mean, part of why we suffer in these worlds of racism, classism, sexism is that there are benefits to it, as sad as it is. There is a benefit to prejudice. Somebody does win. And even if somebody does win and you don't, you're the oppressed one. There could be a dynamic. It's like, what if you're the chosen one amidst your oppressed community? Because nothing says us versus them more than them versus themselves. What if, yeah, sure, women are oppressed, but I married a rich man who treats me like a doll? Or I always say that one of the reasons we never and might not ever end classism, because I think that the poor historically are the one group of oppressed that have never failed across time and space, and yet we don't talk about them as the consistent, like, there's always been poor. The poor have always been screwed. And we don't talk about them in that frame. Usually we talk about how women have been oppressed historically, how blacks and indigenous have been oppressed historically across the world. And nobody ever says, like, there's one big group that outweighs them all, and that's the poor. And that's because poor people go across race, gender, and class. And you ask any poor person, 99% of them want to be rich. So it's one of the few dynamics in terms of oppression where we can actually say the oppressed person does want to be like the oppressor, right? Whereas, I am Latina. Have I faced racial prejudice because being Latina? Yes. I wouldn't trade it though. I'm a woman. I have absolutely faced violence against me for being a woman. Even like my dad wouldn't trade it. As oddly as it sounds, I would like one day where I was like a man and a really handsome man. I don't care what race. I just want to be a man for a day. I think everybody would kind of, and maybe that's my point. I think across other oppressions, there isn't relatively a desire to, go from black to white, but there is a desire to have blackness be as respected and guarded as whiteness, right? There is a desire, we've all been curious what it is to live a day in another person's shoes, particularly our oppressor's shoes. But there is a feeling with poverty and wealth that if you work hard enough and if you're smart enough and special enough and good enough, you can actually become rich and still stay you. I don't have to lose everything that is me to become rich. In fact, I just have to figure out how what is all of me can become that. And yeah, that was a little bit of a educated ramble. But I I've been looking back at a lot of my stories, and one of the reasons that I take these rests is because I get so angry that I didn't love myself. And I kind of fooled myself to believe that I could actually love this person more and even felt like I did. Then I love myself and somehow not sabotage me, somehow not have doomed us or doomed myself. And I feel like financially, emotionally, creatively, mentally, I've been punished in so many ways, even physically, for not loving myself and entering these situations and dynamics that ended up chewing me up. All the people that betrayed me couldn't have betrayed me without me betraying myself, without me somehow entering as a lie or lying to myself until they finally did. And we talk often about like the law of attraction, and I know so many people who feel like they attract losers and toxic people despite the good that they are. And I'm one of those people. Like, I can genuinely say in all of my relationships, I was really good to my partners. And I really, the complexity of whether or not I loved them or whether or not they loved me, sometimes I don't know how to approach because I was thinking about it and I have a few upcoming episodes about this of kind of I don't like how they loved me. They loved me through their trauma. They loved me toxically. They abused me or used me and they called it love. Whereas the relief of my father, as sad as it is saying I was relieved by my abuser, is that he did say he didn't love me. He did, and that's one of the reasons I left. Your abuser is only going to get worse when they start not even trying to have a mask. And but when I approach some of my exes, even whether they were messy or just plain, as we heard in a prior episode with Dariel, called "Don't Eat Your Pizza Like That." I don't know if it's that they didn't love me or I just am at a place right now where I can admit I didn't like how they loved me. They loved me meanly. They loved me plainly. They weren't reciprocal. They weren't kind. And that is, it's a strange thing to wrap your head around. And I'm actually getting a little teary eyed because what we do, abuse victims, particularly women, is that there's a part of us that wishes we could just gather everything that we gave them because we took the loss. And now I have to rebuild from you. I didn't just lose what I gave, I lost me. And then I have to wrap my head around the fact that it wasn't that I lost me because I was with you. I was with you because I was lost. And I thought because I was functional and I was kind and I was sweet and I was still floating while feeling like I'm drowning, that I was okay. Because that was the thing about all these relationships that have left me resentful. They have revealed to me I wasn't that okay and I left worse. And it's this weird thing of kind of, I didn't realize I was running on an empty cup until they smashed it. And now I not only have to get a new cup or rebuild a cup, I have to figure out how to fill it. And it's these horrible wake up calls that nobody says. You don't go through one wake up call, you go through like 15. You don't see the flashing lights once, you see them a few times until you process, oh my God, a truck is headed here. Let me like dodge the car. And that's why I'm really working on loving myself because it's just dumb. I don't think I talked about how to avoid an ego, the prior episode of how to avoid a Mr. H. And I don't, I've always said it, people that are egotistical and narcissistic don't have the capacity to love. They don't actually love themselves. They love their shadow. Like they love that you love them. That's the best, that's the closest they're going to come to love. How they make you love them, and that's why inevitably they will crush you because love is reciprocal. It is a back and forth. And that's why eventually you will leave them or they will leave you when you start feeling like there's no why are you staying? How am I staying in this? If that makes any sense. A lot of my relationships ended either by me leaving. I left them, but they abandoned me. And they usually ended with this sense of I got tired of them and they got disappointed or felt disrespected by the fact that I finally saw they were exhausting, that they weren't exciting, that they weren't a person with boundaries, they were a person with disrespect, that they weren't special, they were just basic assholes that knew how to hold a good mask, right? And it's this mutual, I wrote about it in an upcoming episode. We got a lot of upcomers. One of my exes said to me, "You don't love me." And I got pissed. I was so, I'm sure we've all been through this. Sometimes the truth is so harsh, it like sucker punches you spiritually. And then you you almost fight it, and then it takes you leaving the situation, takes you getting some time and space to realize it was true. And he said that, and I felt so disrespected, because I thought, look at all that I gave you. How could you say that wasn't out of love? And the grand irony is that that was the same excuse that my family gave me when I didn't feel loved. When I didn't feel loved by my mom, the first thing she did was list every single item she ever bought me, and kind of said, how I pay for your roof. How could you say I don't love you? And I'm like, well, were you going to be ruthless? I buy you food. Yeah, we split the meals. If you were going to make yourself a pork chop, you just made me an extra one. And, my father was very, I showed up. Like, if you see my 18th birthday, his 7-Eleven, um, which is a prior episode, he just wanted a parade for showing up. Whether or not he showed up high, whether or not he showed up angry, whether or not he showed up with a scheme, it didn't matter. He really went on that Kanye mentality of my presence is a present, kiss my ass kind of thing. And I was raised to believe and be so overwhelmingly grateful for the bare minimum of the adults in my life across both families gave me. I mean, you even see it in a prior episode. I forget which one. I went over to my cousins, and they had this kind of weekend party that they didn't invite me to, but I wasn't allowed to be with my father's family. Very rarely did he allow me to go and meet with them. And my cousins really liked me. We had great chemistry. They were great people. And he they didn't invite me to that party because all of my father's family was going to be there. But they did invite me to a sleepover, like them and me personally, the next weekend. And it was this kind of, I don't hate you. I do love you. I just hide you because everybody is uncomfortable by your existence. As if, like as if I was his only secret. Come on. I was the secret that got caught. Um, but it's that weird kind of, I never got love without mess. I never got truth without lies, never got acceptance without discomfort. And I was made to believe that that was natural and that was normal because I was surrounded by people that A, either couldn't imagine better, or B, didn't want to work for it anymore. Like, my father, by the time I came into my father's life, he was done. He was never going to grow up. He was never going to heal. He was never going to become a better human being. He was just too rottenized, let's say, either by his nature or by his nurture. But he was done. And I think that in some ways, that's not, he may have been the worst version of that truth, but there were different versions of that. I think my father manipulated my mother via her unhealed grief and not having a dad, and at not having a solid male relationship, because my mother was always really smart, really talented, and that's a really dangerous thing to be as a woman in this world, but particularly in a family that is poor, uneducated. If by your nature you're really smart and you're really strong, and you're in this background of a lot of poverty, a lot of uneducation, very misogynist, you may not realize it, but you've got a scarlet letter on you, because you are something that is not only attributed it to men, but it's attributed to men that even when they don't have it. The men in my family, like my dad, were dumb. Like, even when they were smart, they weren't emotionally or connected or had a sense of common sense. There was always some level of viciousness or vitriol or some level of bitterness. Like they just weren't healed, either mentally or emotionally. But my family was very into the idea of we're fun and we're funny. Who cares if we're mean, right? And I'm like, well, the lines are blurred between funny and mean, right? And when you're taught to kind of make the lovable what is unlovable and acceptable what is unacceptable, you may not see it, but you are a manifestation of that environment, and it's going to reshape you in certain ways if you don't confront it. And I was doing the very thing that annoyed me, which was I give to people, I expect them to give back because you should. You should have those expectations. You should have those requirements. You should have those boundaries. Reciprocity matters. It's integral to justice. Integral. Give and take. Damn, she got passionate. But and when he said that, I was so hurt, and I understood in a indirect way the emptiness my mother must have felt when I would confront her in these times of I don't think you actually love and like me just because you occasionally cook me dinner and you buy me dolls that you really enjoy, right? And I don't feel in a like spiritually connected to you. And mind you, one of the things with my exes, I have to acknowledge I picked badly. It, it could come off harsh that I say they were all bad people, but they were. They weren't kind. They were greedy. They were liars. They were scheming. And I think that we confuse, there are people who will say that about every person they loved, and it may not be necessarily true. But I say that from a place of, I picked these people, and I have to go through the mud of analyzing whether I actually loved them or I didn't love myself. And in turn, they became a manifestation of that. I was so lonely in my self loathing that I just got a partner in it. And that's why when I say they were bad people, I picked them. I picked bad people. If you lie, if you stole, if you scheme, if you verbally abused me, if you made fun of me, if you humiliated me, if you yelled at me in public, I chose you. I chose you. And you did all those things, and not only were they bad, we have the tendency to separate people from their actions. Some people act badly but they don't intend it. Some people intend have bad intentions but they act well, like my Kardashian example. And one thing that my father taught me was that he had bad actions and bad intentions. That does exist. And I picked those people because I had him as a dad. And for a very long time, I was taught his abuse was normal, even if it wasn't good. And it would be better of me to be silent about it and not embrace how evil and destructive it has been to me because that would hurt his feelings. And I didn't realize I was entering a lot of relationships with these untapped hurt feelings because I thought burying them was what I was supposed to do. And that was a form of honor. But it's because I buried them, I never actually let myself free. I never actually got out of that energy of you need to hide. Because if people find out that Mr. H had more kids beyond the one he publicly acknowledges, he might get in trouble and he might have to have some really weird conversations that he's just too weak to handle. Because that was the thing about my dad. There was this massive agreement that he was weak. But yet you were deemed weaker if you didn't help or hide his weakness. It just didn't make sense. And that was the thing about my self loathing. You know, like this idea that I could actually love myself, love someone, and get this grand true love when there were parts of me I absolutely detested and spiraled into other things like anxiety when I didn't need to be anxious, paranoia of fearing something will go wrong when everything was okay. And I attracted people that did that. I had one ex say, don't love me via your trauma. And he too just ended up verbally assaulting me. It's this weird thing of, I think for a lot of people, we grew up so unloved that we launched into the world eager to experience it. And the older we get and the less we experience it, we feel either A, more desperate for it, or B, more dead to it. Like there are moments where it's like, oh, it's just never going to happen. There's no such thing as love. There's no such thing as kind love. Or other moments of, yes, it can happen. I just have to lose all my boundaries. Maybe I asked for too much respect. Maybe I've got to earn it. It's this spiraling of trying to figure out a strategy of how to be with others while never seeing that you do have to analyze how to be with yourself. You just do. And if you're really serious about finding love, you have to find it with you. And you do have to do that little look back because everybody loves to stay in the past and actually walk in as, I'm the hero of my story. Lover or hater, I'm the hero. And I picked some bad guys. So why is this hero going through a villain era? And not in a good way. So check out daddyrecovery.com. Check out theinterviewsatall.com and check out everything I do. Check out my music at Hadleen. And thank you so much for following me, for loving me, for being on this journey with me because I think you're cool. I really do. I don't know if we know each other yet. But I think that like to not give up on you is so cool. To try to love you and rest and heal all that abuse that you were made to believe you deserved or that ignoring was somehow healing. I think it's just great that you're getting better. I really do. Please don't stop. We need more of you. All right.